Welcome, everyone, to episode 11 of the Sports Lawyers Association's Sports Shorts. Today, our guest is Mike Tannenbaum, longtime SLA board member, even longer time SLA member. And we're going to have a little chat with Mike today about everything from how did a nice Tulane law graduate end up on ESPN to the path he's taken from his law degree through various NFL franchises, at least, and his current project, the 33rd team. Welcome, Mike.
Great to be with you, Bobby. How are things?
Things are good. So you started your career under the tutelage of Gary Roberts, I would assume, at Tulane and the sports program there. Did you have an interest in sports coming out of law before you went to law school, or did the program at Tulane help push you in the professional direction you ended up choosing?
Yeah, actually, I went there because of Gary Roberts and because of all his accomplishments. He was at a firm called Covington and Burling and did a lot of work on the NFL with, at the time, the league counsel, Paul Tagliabue, who, of course, went on to a long and distinguished career as the commissioner of the NFL. And that's why I went there, hoping that I could pursue a dream in sports. I was incredibly lucky and fortunate. I tell people, like, my story is really grounded in luck and good fortune. And basically what happened was, for the first 75 years in pro football, if a team had the players' rights and wanted to keep them, there were some exceptions with Plan B, but basically that team kept his rights. And there was litigation in 1982, 87, but then finally in 93, there was a big settlement in the form of a collective bargaining agreement where the players were able to get free agency and the owners got cost certainty in the form of a salary cap. And I was so lucky because here's this literally once in a 75-year event. I'm in law school, and in the city, there was one pro sports team at the time, the Saints, and it all changed overnight. And for a year and a half, I worked for free for the Saints, learning the salary cap while studying under Professor Roberts at Tulane.
And from there, you sort of had an experience on the front lines, which is sort of a great internship, I guess we can call it. And did that lead directly to your first job out of law school in sports?
So during my year and a half in law school, I just had observations about who I thought was using the cap effectively, who was, like, from a strategic standpoint, planning standpoint. I put a book together with my observations and I sent it out to 60 people. There was 30 teams. So every head coach and GM in the league, I literally got 59 rejection letters. And the one team that hired me was Coach Belichick in Cleveland, and graduated with honors from law school. And I made $300 a week working for the Browns in 95.
And your parents said you went to law school. Why?
Yeah, it actually gets better. So, or worse, I should say. The story gets better. My economic situation at that point got worse. So the 95 Browns, as you may recall, became the Ravens. So a bunch of us got let go. So I'm actually driving on the New York State Thruway from Cleveland, Ohio, back to where my folks lived in Needham, Massachusetts. And they said, "Hey, we got this letter here." I'm like, "Okay, open it up." And it was my first law school loan payment. And I'm like, "This is great. I'm 27 years old. I'm $60,000 in debt from law school, unemployed, and living with my parents."
But that didn't last too long, did it?
No, I was able to get back on my feet and get hired by the Saints again. And at this point, I'm making $400 a week. Very happy with the Saints. And that was 1996. Following the 96 season, Coach Belichick and Coach Parcells left the Patriots and went to the Jets, where I got hired. Obviously, that was a huge break in my career. And I spent 16 years there and fortunate enough to work my way up to being the GM there for 7 years.
And is there any greater highlight than your, clearly Emmy-winning performance on Hard Knocks?
Yeah, that was, it was, the irony is I did that kicking and screaming. I didn't want to do it. Everybody else wanted to do it. And then it gets worse when our best player, Darrelle Revis, holds out on national TV. So, ironically, we went on and we had a great year. We went to the championship game that year. And I was like, gosh, I can't believe we were able to do Hard Knocks, have our best player miss all of training camp, and then actually have a great year. So it's funny how things worked out. And then after 16 years, that ended, and I became a coaching representation. Went to Priority Sports and was an agent, and enjoyed that experience. I had a great privilege of working with Steve Kerr, and worked with a year for Steve to get him ready to transition from broadcasting to coaching. And one of the many lessons he taught me was we get the deal done with the Warriors, and it's for a substantial amount of money. And I said, congratulations. What are you going to go do now? He's like, I'm going to go to Las Vegas and make mistakes. He's like, I've never coached before. Golden State's giving me this incredible opportunity. I have to go coach the summer league team and get used to my rotation and know when to use timeouts and the media. And one of the many inspiring things about Steve was like, he's a life learner. And here's a guy that was obviously an incredible player, incredible broadcaster. People don't realize he was a great GM of the Phoenix Suns, and literally could say, I got this massive contract. I'm going to take the summer off. Next day, he's like, no, we're going to Vegas. And I was there for his first game, and he was coaching like it was game 7. And I just try to have that mindset, Bobby. Like, I think of like, here's Steve Kerr with a 5-year guaranteed contract, coaching minor league basketball to learn his craft. And did that for a couple of years. Very, very good experience for me. And then I got a chance to get to know Steve Ross, owner of the Dolphins. Got to run the Dolphins for 4 years, which was great. Learned a ton there. Had the GM report to me. I was a little bit higher up the totem pole. Went to the playoffs there. Our quarterback couldn't stay healthy. That hurt us in the end. And within 10 days of that ending, ESPN had an opening for an on-air position to be their general manager. And that's been wonderful. Again, I like to learn. I'm with people that are really, really good at what they do. I hired a broadcast coach because I felt like I was awful at it and I was embarrassing myself. And I was like, if I'm really going to do this, I have to lean in and get better. So I hired a broadcast coach, and actually it's remarkably, I'm going to my 3rd season with them. It's just amazing how fast time goes by. And that's been great. And that's allowed me to do some really other interesting things. Most notably, as you mentioned, the 33rd team, which is 33rdteam.com. And we're a consortium of former head coaches and GMs. And we mentor students that want to work in sports. And proudly, we've placed 6 students in the NFL in the last 3 weeks. And we try to put out interesting and differentiated content. We have a free newsletter. All of our content's completely free. And that's been a very fulfilling experience as well.
Yeah, well, I read it every day it comes out. I really enjoy it. For those out there in the audience that haven't had a chance yet, you should, if you care about the NFL at all and you have any interest, you get great insight on all kinds of things. But there's another issue I want to talk to you about regarding the NFL in particular, and that's in the last year, really, we've seen, I guess the best way to describe it is the acceptance of athlete activism in the National Football League. And recently, Commissioner Goodell came out, and without apologizing to Colin Kaepernick, he seemed to kind of apologize to Colin Kaepernick. How does that change a role of a GM when you sort of understand from on high that it's okay for your athletes to have a voice? And you work with, with Ross, and he's been out in front of, equity and inclusion through his initiatives. How does that really affect a GM when you're juggling both putting the best team on the field, given the constraints of the collective bargaining agreement, the salary cap, and now you're dealing with social activism? Does that generally all fall to upper management to sort of make sure that works and you still put a product on the field?
Yeah, I think it's all about organizational excellence. I think organizations are going to be held at a much higher level of accountability, and that can manifest itself on player communication, which is obviously the crux of what's going on right now in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, and more fundamentally, as you mentioned, with athlete activism. But I think it's much broader than that. I think it's like more about athlete sort of enlightenment. And look, I grew up with a 2-parent family in the Northeast, and I remember early on in my career, Coach Parcells, who has influenced me in so many different ways, talking about being able to understand and how to influence people either in a negotiation or in a leadership role, and how being a great listener and being empathetic and being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And that really changed me, really for the better, just because I grew up in a very sort of like in an environment that was really not consistent with what an NFL locker room was all about. And it really opened my eyes in the formative years of my career. And I think that's why guys like Coach Parcells were so successful, because they were able to have a relatability to people of disparate backgrounds. And I think nowadays, again, be it athlete activism or, like I would like to say, enlightenment, as an organization, we should be there to help them, support them, educate them, put them in a position where they can make a meaningful transition to whatever their passion is in society and be successful on the field. And it's not by accident that, it's funny, Adam Gase, he had some very interesting observation, which is, he used to talk about how the players that had messy lockers oftentimes had the most mental mistakes. Like, that was not by accident. And the point is, like, if you're organized and motivated and interested in other things off the field, oftentimes, like, you're gonna have that same level of maturity on the field. So it's actually a positive from a standpoint. Like, if you have your, stuff together off the field, you're probably gonna have your stuff together on the field. And again, Steve Ross is a great example. Look, the owners I work for were wonderful. Woody Johnson, Steve Ross, like, they supported their players in meaningful ways. And I think we're going to see, more of that in the coming years.
Part of what you just said about being, I guess the best way to describe it is an empathetic listener. Is that important as a negotiating skill? Be a better listener and to sort of try to put yourself in the shoes of the player or the agent with whom you're dealing. And you've been on both sides of it, because you worked as an agent and you also were sitting in the chair trying to get the deals done with the players.
I think listening is the most underrated aspect of being an effective negotiator. Now, my wife of 20 years would tell you that that's a skill that I'm very good at, which she is probably right about. But in all seriousness, absolutely. And Ron Shapiro, a prominent agent attorney out of Baltimore, he has a couple of books that I've read and taken his class. And he talked about some very fundamental things about, ask again, and things like grow the pie, meaning like, hey, look, let's not just negotiate over this $1. Like, how can we make this a more meaningful, sustainable relationship? So I always try to take the vantage point of like, how can I serve? How can I help you get to where you want to go? And I would say over time, like, doing contracts in the league were harder because you have cash budgets, you have a salary cap, you have a lot of competing interests, and that bullseye got smaller and smaller. And I think from an agent standpoint, I would say try to understand what my client wants to do, not just short-term, long-term, and to the extent we can get some other non-economic goals. To me, we all have families to feed, and we got to put a roof over our head body. And I don't mean to minimize that, but I feel like the most fulfilling and best deals I've done are the ones that, take the economic consideration, but also a much bigger picture than that.
Yeah, it seems to me that from my own experience on the TV side of things, and I think it's similar in many respects in professional sports, is when you're in a situation where somebody wants to work for you and you want that person to work for you, for your organization, you should be able to find common ground in theory. And I've always questioned the yeller and screamer negotiators. What are you achieving by that? It's a show of power that leaves a bad taste in someone's mouth. And I think it's important to I think what you were describing is a more holistic view of the relationship in that context. What else can this player bring to you other than a powerful arm, for example, and how it relates to the community in those roles in the National Football League. Do you think there's much concern for the relationship that a player has with the community when they're deciding, between A and B? Well, this guy's pretty good, but this guy's pretty good, but he'd be better for our community. Does that ever happen?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just about the community, but like fit is really important, you know, and that could be about, you know, sort of like their ethos, like their work ethic, their interests certainly off the field, their where they are in their life, married, single, what they're trying to accomplish. I mean, we've recruited players when, you know, we knew that their spouse had, you know, problems with pregnancy, and you know, we would try to show like what an incredible medical staff we had. We showed players, you know, urban experiences when they were interested in living in the city. We showed people rural experiences when they were interested in hunting and fishing. You know, and in pro football, you have 90 people in your locker room in the off season, so there's all sort of like different constituents, but having a very good understanding of like how they fit is important. Coach Belichick talked a lot about too about, excuse me, like you want your highest paid player in each room to be homegrown to the extent you can, because once you bring those somebody in from the outside that's going to make more, it sends a tough message to your team. Now, that's not to say you're not trying to improve your team, but that's a pretty good guideline to go by.
Yeah, when in my involvement in sports on my own, I always had a rule when I was as a coach and certainly as a role, a guy in the locker room. I always found most success in a team when you adopted, and I hope I don't offend anyone, what I like to call the no asshole rule. And that is if you have a guy who's supremely talented, but he doesn't get along with everybody else, that dissension in the locker room can be a cancer. And I'm just curious, and I'm not asking for names, but was there ever a situation where management wanted a player, but you as the GM or with the, your executive role with the Dolphins, you just felt that that was not good for the locker room? And isn't that a tough conversation to have?
Yeah, I can tell you some really funny stories. You know, first of all, like if Coach Belichick was on this, Bobby, he would agree with you. You know, he used to say in draft meetings that, you know, the two things that a college football player will have in pro football that they don't have in college is more time and more money. He's like, look, if someone's an asshole in college, we could say asshole, right? Because this is SLA.
Yeah.
Okay, good. If someone's an asshole in college and we give them more time and more money, they're going to be a bigger asshole. So let's figure out who the assholes are and let's try to stay away from them. You know, then you would work with somebody like Rex Ryan, and you know, he came out of the womb and he'll go to the coffin trying to rush the passer. So he used to say to me, Mike, like, look, just so we're clear about something, if this guy's a really good pass rusher and he's tested positive, it's secondhand smoke. If it's an offensive player, we have no interest in him. So, you know, with coaches come in all shapes and sizes. But in all seriousness, I think one thing, you know, to take you a little bit behind the curtain, there is this whole notion of you know, football character, which is people that are great teammates, work hard, compliant, do the extra things. And look, there's a lot of great football players that are well documented. They are not choir boys, and you try to support them, get them help. You want them again to have a meaningful transition to society when they're done playing. But they're not. They're not all choir boys. Like this is a tough sport that's going to attract, you know, again, a disparate type of person, and some of them make great transitions and learn and grow up, and others ultimately won't be a good fit. And I think from a front office standpoint, I always sort of define my responsibility as like being the point guard of information, meaning like, hey, if we're going to sign player X, here's what we can't do. So if we need a corner and we're going to extend to get this defensive lineman, our starting corner next year is going to come from the draft. So when there's this great free agent corner next year, remember this conversation that we can't afford that player.
And now we have the NFL, and you've touched on it a little bit on the 33rd Team newsletter. 17 regular season games. I'm amazed that these superhuman athletes, which is, I think, how I can only refer to guys that can play in the NFL, adding that extra game seems almost exponential to me. How are they going to manage squads? Is there any chatter that you're hearing about expanding roster size, expanding the, your developmental squad? Is any of that going on? Because, you see the injuries, and as the guys get bigger and stronger and faster, and now you add the preseason games, we know that a lot of your starters are getting just a few quarters of play. Now you give them a whole other game. What's the impact on the decision-making process with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's been some subtle changes. Like, so game day rosters have one more spot for an offensive lineman. Practice squad rosters have expanded over the last couple of years. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of that proliferation of injury reserve rules, practice squad, where, not to get too technical, but where you could bring a player up and not subject him to waivers and possibly lose him. And I think I'm one where I'm a little like wait and see on this because, again, not that they played a lot, but there used to be 4 preseason games. Now we're at 17-3. I don't think we're going to see vets play a lot. I think really where our sport's going to is like a whole notion of customization. You know, recently we saw Bruce Arians talk about it. Like, Tom Brady doesn't need the same experience right now that Kyle Trask does. You know, first of all, they're 25 years apart. You know, and Tom Brady, you know, has played longer than Kyle Trask's been alive. And I think we're going to see some like more of that where the veteran player probably won't practice nearly as much as they once did. And I think you're going to see maybe a little bit more like judicious, you know, use of rosters. Now, there's been some speculation would, you know, a key player be you know, sat down and not played. And I think that's just, you know, to me, like, it's one word, Bobby. It's strategy. You know, we saw it last night. You know, I'm a big Clipper guy, and, you know, Kawhi Leonard, you know, bumped his knee. Hopefully he'll be okay. But, you know, Tyrone Lue made the calculated decision that, look, let's take him out. Looks like we have enough of a lead. You know, it's now going to be a best of 3 series, and let's rest him and obviously hope that he's okay. You know, if that was a 1 possession game, you know, maybe Kawhi Leonard could have been out there. Point being is, you know, that's what we're paying the coaches to do. And I think over 17 games, we're going to see some calculated decisions where players may be rested for strategic purposes.
So, having spent the majority of your career working in the National Football League, is there a lesson that you can take from law school that really served you well in your time in the league?
Yeah, a lot. You know, I think like for me, you know, because I was never the smartest guy. Like, I feel like for me, like my superpower was like, I'm just going to outwork you because I need to. And I sort of had a discipline of like, I had to read basically like if I read 100 pages a day, I could stay on top of my workload. And I sort of brought that same sort of like rigor to, you know, with a team. Like, I'm going to be prepared and, you know, ready to go when called upon. And also have, and really like, it's funny, like it actually applies a little bit to like representing players or coaches. It works too, like in broadcasting, Bobby, where, you know, when you make a statement, or at least for me, like my role on ESPN is to be the on-air GM. So if I'm talking about what the Packers should do on Aaron Rodgers, like I'm starting with a declarative statement based on maybe how I've handled things. And that's really like when you think about like the law and understanding, you know, precedent, like that sort of formulaic thinking, to me, there's a lot of consistencies.
But answer the question: what happens with Aaron Rodgers? You know, he's a Cal guy. I got to find out. I'm
Yeah,
dying to know.
you know, Bobby, in my opinion, and take it for what it's worth, because you know this opinion is worth what you're paying for, which is 0. Um, I think the worm is going to turn at some point, and I think he's going to have a sobering of like, if you want to play football this year, which you may not, but if you do, you're a Packer. And that may not happen till Labor Day, may not happen till October 1st. Because let's put ourselves in the Packer shoes, Bobby. If you trade Aaron Rodgers and you're not successful, you're going to lose your job. So why would you trade him? And by the way, if you're going to trade him, the biggest part of that package is going to be for draft choices in the 2022 draft. Like, you can make that trade next April. Like, why would you make it now? Why not try to wait him out and try to fix things?
Well, I guess time will tell. But thank you so much for taking the time with us today, Mike, and just filling us in on your background and how the law works, and just some interesting behind the curtain stuff. And again, everyone out there, the 33rd Team newsletter, it's pretty great. And if you want to look behind the curtain with, you know, legendary GMs besides Mike that right there, and coaches, you'll get some really good insights. If you love the NFL, it's a great place to view. So Mike, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time, and look forward to seeing you in person soon.
All right, Bobby, really appreciate you having me, and anything for the SLA, always happy to help out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, if anybody wants to join the SLA, which we encourage, go to sportslaw.org, sign up, become a member of the SLA, get all the great stuff that we have behind the paywall. And in 2 weeks, we'll be back with another Sports Shorts episode. And look out for more outreach events, webinars, and other content offerings that we're expanding with Sports Lawyers Association. Thank you all, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks.